The night Eli Mercer walked into that diner, he wasn't looking for a hero. He was looking for a way out. 11 years old. Bruises hidden under 3 layers of clothing. A photograph sewn into his jacket lining that could destroy the most trusted man in town and get Eli killed if the wrong person found it first. He had told 5 adults the truth. 5 adults had chosen the lie. And now, on the coldest Tuesday in October, 287 motorcycles were thundering toward Milford Ridge, Kentucky, and not one single person in that town understood yet that the monsters they were terrified of were the only thing standing between their children and the real predator wearing a championship ring and a Sunday smile. Stay with me until the end of this story. You will not regret it. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I read every single one. And let's go. The rain came in sideways that Tuesday evening, the kind of cold October rain that doesn't fall so much as it attacks, driving itself into jacket collars and under fingernails and into the spaces between thoughts where a person's last bit of warmth tries to hide. Milford Ridge, Kentucky, had that particular smell that small American towns get before a storm. Motor oil baking off wet asphalt, wood smoke from somebody's chimney 3 streets over, and underneath all of it, the faint chemical sweetness of a Dollar General that never quite aired out. The kind of town where everyone knew your name, and half of them were already deciding what to think about you before you opened your mouth. Ruby's Diner sat in the intersection of Route 9 and Callaway Street, like it had been dropped there by accident and simply never moved. The neon sign out front, Ruby's in faded pink, the apostrophe gone dark sometime around 2009, hummed with the particular frequency of something holding on by sheer stubbornness. The parking lot held 4 pickup trucks, a mud-streaked Jeep, and a Buick so old it might have had opinions about the Korean War. Inside, the overhead fluorescents did that thing cheap fluorescents do in bad weather, flickering every 40 seconds or so, just enough to remind everyone that comfort was provisional. Eli Mercer sat at the far end of the counter, the last stool before the swinging kitchen door, wearing a gray hoodie 2 sizes too large and holding a mug of hot chocolate he'd been nursing for the better part of an hour. He was 11. He looked 9. Not because he was small. He wasn't, particularly, but because of the way he held himself, shoulders curved inward like parentheses trying to disappear from their own sentence. His pale blue eyes were fixed on the surface of the counter, tracing a scratch in the laminate with his thumbnail, and if Ruby Calloway herself hadn't been watching the boy since he walked in soaking wet and sat down without saying a word to anyone, she might not have noticed the way he flinched when the bell above the door jangled, or the way his hand dropped below the counter every few minutes to press against his left side just below his rib cage, like checking that something hidden there was still safe. Ruby had been running this diner for 31 years. She had served truckers and county sheriffs and crying teenagers and drunk veterans and every species of human loneliness the American highway could produce. She knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had seen everything twice, that the boy at the end of her counter was carrying something heavier than his backpack. She'd brought him the hot chocolate without asking. He hadn't looked up when she set it down. He'd just said thank you in a voice like a door closing very quietly in an empty house. The television above the pie case was running local news on mute, closed captions stuttering across the bottom of the screen. A fundraiser, youth football. The Milford Ridge Junior Eagles, undefeated for the 3rd straight season under the direction of Coach Darren Voss. On screen, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s grinned at the camera with the kind of practiced ease that looks like confidence and feels, if you've developed the right instincts, like something else entirely. He was holding a novelty check. $40,000 raised for the Children's Athletics Foundation. Behind him, a row of 12-year-old boys in jerseys held a banner and tried to look proud. Eli's thumbnail stopped moving across the laminate scratch. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at his own reflection in the dark window beside him, that rippling, rain-distorted version of himself. And then he looked back down at the counter and pressed his hand harder against his left side. Nobody in the diner noticed. The 2 men at the far booth were arguing about property taxes. The woman with the toddler in the high chair was cutting grilled cheese into triangles with the focused intensity of surgery. Ruby was refilling the coffee of an older man with a seed cap who was doing a crossword puzzle and hadn't looked up in 20 minutes. The neon sign hummed. The rain hammered the windows. The fluorescent lights flickered once, held. Eli had been sitting in that diner for an hour because he had nowhere else to go. He had gone to the school counselor 6 weeks ago, Ms. Patricia Henley, whose office smelled like essential oils and false optimism, had listened to him for 11 minutes. He had counted, because counting helped him stay in his body when his body wanted to float away. And then she had written the words emotionally dysregulated in her notepad in a handwriting he could read upside down. She had called his mother. His mother had come to the school looking tired in the way she'd been looking tired for 3 years since his dad left, tired in a way that had become her permanent weather. She had held Eli's hand in the parking lot and said, "Honey, I know you've been struggling," in a voice that meant, "Please don't make this harder than it already is." He had tried to tell her about the photograph. She had asked him where he'd gotten it. When he told her, through the truck window in the parking lot behind the field house, using his phone, zoom all the way in, hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it, she had looked at him with something he couldn't name then, but could name now. It was the look of someone who desperately wants to believe the more comfortable version of a story. She had said she would talk to someone. She had meant she would think about it until it felt less real. Then there was the deputy, Macon Price, who coached JV basketball and had known Darren Voss since they were both at Milford Ridge High in 1998. Eli had waited outside the sheriff's substation for 40 minutes before Deputy Price came out to talk to him. The conversation had lasted 7 minutes. At one point, Deputy Price had crouched down to Eli's eye level with the studied concern of a man performing concern for an invisible audience. And he had said, "Son, Coach Voss is one of the finest men in this county. You understand what kind of accusation you're making?" And Eli had said, "Yes, sir," because he was 11, and his body understood the architecture of conversations that were already over before they began. He understood something else by then, too. The Truth, in Milford Ridge, Kentucky, had a dress code, and he didn't have the right clothes. The vibration reached the diner before the sound did. It was subtle at first, a low-frequency tremor that moved through the floor, up through the stool legs, into the backs of Eli's thighs. The coffee in Ruby's pot rippled almost imperceptibly, like that famous scene from the movie with the dinosaurs, except this wasn't a movie, and the rumbling didn't stop. It built. It layered on top of itself, harmonic and enormous, and somehow still rhythmic, the way a thunderstorm is rhythmic if you can hear the whole sky at once. The older man with the crossword looked up from his puzzle. The two arguing about property taxes went quiet. Even the toddler in the high chair stopped reaching for her grilled cheese and turned toward the windows with wide, unanswering eyes. And then the headlight swept across the front of Ruby's diner like a slow tide, one after another, and the sound hit full volume. Not a roar exactly, more like a sustained declaration, the unmistakable collective voice of 100 and then 200 and then more Harley-Davidson engines rolling through a Kentucky town at 8:47 on a Tuesday night. Ruby Calloway set down her coffee pot. Her jaw was tight. She had heard stories about the Iron Saints for years. Everyone in this part of Kentucky had. She didn't know what was true and what was rumor and what was just the particular anxiety that small towns manufacture about anything they don't control. What she knew right now was that the people in her diner had gone very, very still, and that the sound outside wasn't slowing down. The first few bikes rolled past the window, then more. Then what seemed like an uncountable number, a dark procession of chrome and leather and road dust, headlights cutting through the rain. Some of them pulled into the lot. Some continued down Calloway Street. The parking lot filled up in the way water fills a low space, inevitably, completely, without negotiating. The couple at the property tax booth leaned together. The woman with the toddler pulled her daughter into her lap. The old man with the crossword folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket as if preparing for something, though he wasn't sure what. The bell above the door jangled. The man who walked in was not the biggest man Eli had ever seen, but he had that quality that certain people carry, the quality of taking up the precise amount of space they're entitled to and not 1 inch less. He was somewhere in his 40s, hard to tell exactly, with a face that looked like it had survived a series of decisions, some of them good. His leather cut was faded black, the Iron Saints patch on the back visible for just a moment before he turned to face the room, and on the front, a name tag in hand-stitched white thread that read, Creed. His boots were wet. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead in the rain. His eyes, the color of creek water in November, somewhere between gray and green, moved across the diner in one slow sweep, the kind of sweep that isn't dramatic, isn't threatening, is simply comprehensive. The assessment of a man who had spent years in situations where knowing the room was the difference between going home and not going home. He walked to booth 7. He sat down. He put both hands on the table, palms flat, and looked at Ruby, who had come around the counter with a menu she didn't need to bring. "Coffee," he said. "Black, and whatever you got that's hot." His voice was quiet. Not soft. Quiet. The distinction mattered. Ruby brought the coffee. She did not make conversation, neither did he. Over the next 20 minutes, 4 other men came in and filled 2 booths, speaking to each other in low voices, ordering food, drying their faces with paper napkins. A few more stayed in the parking lot, visible through the rain-streaked windows, standing near their bikes, smoking, not blocking traffic, not making noise, not doing anything threatening. Somehow that was worse in the psychology of Milford Ridge, the not doing anything threatening. Threat was easier to process than its absence. Eli watched all of this without appearing to watch. He had developed, in the past 4 months, a particular talent for peripheral awareness, for taking in information without directing his attention, because directing his attention meant other people noticed where it went. He watched Ronan Creed drink his coffee and look at nothing in particular, and something about the man's stillness, not peace, not contentment, but a kind of deliberately maintained quiet, like a door held shut against wind, made the hair on Eli's arm settle down for the first time in longer than he could remember. He didn't decide to do it. Later, he would have no good explanation for what happened next, except that his body had been carrying the photograph for 3 weeks, and his mind had been carrying the truth for 4 months. And sometimes the thing that looks like courage is actually just exhaustion converting itself into motion. He picked up his hot chocolate. He walked to booth 7. He sat down on the opposite bench without asking. Ronan Creed looked up from his coffee. He didn't say anything, didn't look alarmed, didn't perform surprise. He just looked at the kid, pale, too big hoodie, the particular hollow eyes of someone who hasn't slept through a night in a long time, and waited. Eli's mouth was dry. The thing he was about to say had been in his throat for weeks, pressing up against the back of his teeth every time he opened his mouth around an adult, and every single time he had swallowed it back down because the adult in question had already made their decision before he could speak. But this man hadn't made a decision. This man was simply looking at him with those November Creek eyes, waiting, and not filling the silence with his own comfort. "He hurts kids," Eli said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "And nobody believes me." The diner went quiet. Not from outside. The rain kept coming, the bikes outside still murmured, the neon still hummed. But the interior quiet was sudden and complete, the way a room goes quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Ronan Creed set down his coffee mug, slowly. He looked at the boy across from him, really looked, the way people don't look at children, with full attention and without the instinct to manage. And then he said, in that same quiet voice that was not soft, "Tell me." 2 words. No promises attached. No reassurances. No, it's okay. And no, you can trust me. And none of the language that adults used when they were actually saying, "Perform your trauma efficiently so I can process it and return to my life." Just tell me. As if the telling itself was the thing that mattered, regardless of what came after. Eli's hands were shaking. He put them flat on the table the same way Ronan had done, and something about the unconscious mirroring of it, the small boy and this weathered man both with palms flat on a diner table in a Kentucky rainstorm, was almost unbearable to look at if you were Ruby Calloway, watching from the counter with a dish towel in her hands, and 31 years of knowing how human beings behave when they're finally being seen. He talked for 9 minutes. He told Ronan about the team, about the locker room, about the way Darren Voss had a particular way of choosing boys, not randomly, but carefully, methodically, always the ones without fathers present, always the ones whose mothers were too exhausted or too grateful for the male attention their sons were receiving to look closely at the quality of that attention. He told Ronan about the other boy sets Marcus Webb, 13 years old, who had stopped coming to practice and now walked through the hallways of Milford Ridge Middle School with the same hunched parentheses posture that Eli saw every morning in his own bathroom mirror. He told Ronan about the deputy, the counselor, his mother's face. Then he reached into his hoodie, into the lining, through a small cut he'd made along the seam, and he pulled out the photograph. It was printed on regular paper, folded 3 times, protected by a piece of plastic bag secured with a rubber band. He unfolded it and pushed it across the table. The image was blurry. Phone camera zoomed all the way in, shot through a rain-spotted truck window in bad light. But it was legible enough. The back seat of Darren Voss's truck. An open metal box containing cash bundled with elastic bands. A manila folder with the Milford Ridge Junior Athletics Foundation letterhead visible at the top edge. And underneath it, partially visible, what appeared to be a second folder containing papers that, even at low resolution, even through Eli's fear-shaky camera work, had the distinctive layout of personnel records or case files. Ronan looked at the photograph for a long time. "Where was the truck?" he asked. "Behind the field house," Eli said. "He parks back there sometimes." "There's no cameras. How long ago?" 3 weeks. "You've been carrying this for 3 weeks." It wasn't a question. Ronan looked up from the photograph and looked at Eli, and what was in his expression was not pity. Pity would have been worse. Pity would have been unbearable. But something harder and colder and more useful. Something that looked, Eli thought, like the face of a man deciding. Outside, the rain was coming heavier now. Through the window, the shapes of the Iron Saints moved through the parking lot in the amber light of street lamps, leather-shouldered silhouettes in the rain, chrome catching and releasing light as they moved. They didn't look like criminals out there. They looked, in the wet dark, like a weather system. Something enormous and inevitable that had come from very far away and arrived exactly where it intended to. Ronan folded the photograph carefully, put it inside his own jacket pocket, and picked up his coffee again. He drank it. He looked at the window. He looked back at Eli. "You got somewhere to sleep tonight?" he asked. "Yeah," Eli said. Ronan looked at him. "Probably," Eli said. For just a moment, something moved across Ronan Creed's face. Something that lived behind the quiet, behind the stillness, in the part of a man that hasn't been entirely occupied by whatever made him so careful with his words. It was there, and then it was gone, replaced by the maintained quiet, the held door. "Eat something," Ronan said. "I'll get it." He raised 2 fingers toward Ruby without turning around, the gesture of a man who had spent years in places where you didn't take your eyes off what was in front of you. Ruby brought a grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup without being asked for specifics. She set it in front of Eli. She looked at Ronan for 1/2 second with an expression that said several things simultaneously without saying any of them, and went back to the counter. Eli ate. Ronan drank coffee and said nothing, and that nothing had a quality to it, a weight, a presence, that was entirely different from the nothing of adults who had heard Eli speak and then simply waited for him to finish. What Eli didn't know, sitting in that booth eating grilled cheese while the rain hammered Ruby's diner and the motorcycles rumbled outside, was that the man across from him had buried 2 people he failed to protect. What Eli didn't know was that the Iron Saints had not arrived in Milford Ridge by accident. What Eli didn't know was that the manila folder with the Athletics Foundation letterhead had appeared before, in a different county, connected to a different investigation that had gone nowhere because the investigating officer had received a phone call from a county commissioner whose son played on the team. And what Eli absolutely could not have known was that even as he sat in that booth feeling, for the first time in months, something adjacent to safe, Darren Voss had already been told by someone in that diner that a kid was talking to one of the bikers. And Darren Voss was already reaching for his phone. What happens next will change Milford Ridge forever. And not everyone is going to make it through clean. Part 2 is coming. Don't go anywhere. Darren Voss made 2 phone calls in under 4 minutes. The first was to Deputy Macon Price. It lasted 90 seconds. There was no preamble, no sorry to bother you, just the low, controlled voice of a man who had spent years practicing the art of sounding reasonable while engineering outcomes. He said there was a situation developing at Ruby's. He said one of the actual Iron Saints, Macon, you understand what I'm telling you, had been talking to the Mercer kid for going on 15 minutes. He said it in the tone of a man reporting a gas leak, calm, factual, implying catastrophe without overstating it. Deputy Price said he'd drive by. Darren said, "Don't just drive by," in a voice that contained within it the entire history of their friendship. Every favor owed, every uncomfortable truth that two men could hold over each other after 25 years. The second call was to Eli's mother. Sandra Mercer answered on the third ring, the way she answered everything lately. Slightly breathless, as if life kept catching her mid-step. Darren's voice went warm then, the way a gas burner goes from blue to orange with one small adjustment. He told her he'd heard Eli was at Ruby's, which wasn't unusual, but that he'd seen some concerning activity in that part of town tonight. "Those bikers, Sandra." "You know I don't say things to alarm people, but Eli's been having such a hard time lately, and I'd hate for him to get mixed up with, you know how impressionable kids are at that age." He paused exactly long enough to let the concern breathe. "You might want to come get him." He hung up and stood at his kitchen window looking at the rain. His hand, holding the phone, was completely steady. Inside booth 7, Ronan hadn't moved the photograph. It was in his inside pocket now, against his chest, and the weight of it, 8 grams of paper and ink, felt different than the weight of most things he carried. He'd been quiet for 4 minutes since Eli finished eating, which was long enough that a different kind of boy might have mistaken it for indifference. But Eli was not a different kind of boy. He had learned in 4 months of being dismissed by people who filled silence with their own noise to recognize the difference between a man who had stopped listening and a man who was still processing what he'd heard. "The other kid," Ronan said. "Marcus." "Webb," Eli said. "He's in 8th grade." "He talked to anyone?" Eli shook his head. "He doesn't even look at me anymore. We used to—" He stopped, pressed his thumbnail against the table edge. "We used to eat lunch together sometimes. Before." Ronan looked at him. "Before when?" It wasn't a question exactly. It was a door being held open. Eli looked at the table. "Before I started saying things out loud," Eli said. The fluorescent light above them flickered, held. The rain made the windows opaque. The parking lot beyond reduced to moving shadows and chrome gleam and the orange coal ends of cigarettes. From booth 3, a man named Dex watched Ronan and the kid without appearing to watch them, which was a skill he'd developed in the Marines and refined in the 12 years since. Dex was the Iron Saints road captain, not the largest man in the club, but possibly the most dangerous, in the specific sense of dangerous that has nothing to do with size and everything to do with the comprehensive stillness of someone who has run toward gunfire more times than he's run away from it. He had a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking and a plate of eggs he wasn't eating, and his attention was split perfectly between the boy in booth 7 and the diner's front windows, where 3 minutes ago, a Milford Ridge Sheriff's Department cruiser had done a slow roll through the parking lot without stopping. Dex took out his phone and sent one text. 4 words. Price. Parking lot. Once. Across the booth, another saint named Holloway looked up from his phone, looked out the window, looked back at Dex. "We staying?" Holloway asked. He was 29, had the build of someone who'd been in construction before the club, and the eyes of someone who'd made a series of decisions in his mid-20s that he understood perfectly well and regretted imperfectly. "Ask Creed," Dex said. "I'm asking you." Dex looked at the window for another second. "We're staying." Ronan stepped outside at 9:17 into the rain and the particular cold of a Kentucky October that gets into your collar and doesn't leave. The parking lot held 31 Iron Saints bikes now, and the men who belonged to them moved through the wet dark with the specific economy of people who had spent years in weather and didn't waste energy performing discomfort. Some were smoking. 2 were looking at their phones. 1, a man named Parrish, who was 61 and had been riding with Ronan since before Ronan could legally drink, was sitting on the front step of the diner's side entrance with his jacket collar up, doing absolutely nothing, which meant he was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. Ronan stood in the rain and lit a cigarette and looked down Callaway Street where the sheriff's cruiser had parked half a block away with its lights off. A man appeared at his elbow, not from inside, from the side of the building, emerging from the dark the way certain men can emerge from dark, which is to say, without announcement and without theatrical intention. He was Ronan's height, leaner, with the particular quality of attention that ex-detectives carry even when they've shed everything else about the job. His name was Ash Mercer. He was 43 years old. He was Eli Mercer's paternal uncle. He had been riding with the Iron Saints for 6 years, 4 months, and 11 days, and he had not spoken to his brother, Eli's father, in 3 of those years for reasons that were complicated in the way that family reasons are always complicated, which is to say, simple at the core, devastating in the details. Kid made contact, Ronan said. Ash was quiet. You knew he was here? Parrish texted me when he sat down with you. Ash paused. He looked at the sheriff's cruiser down the street. He's gotten bigger. He's carrying a photograph. Ronan took a drag. Voss's truck, cash, foundation paperwork, something else, files of some kind, couldn't make out the headers. Ash's jaw moved. He looked at the ground. He looked up at the sky, which was doing nothing but raining with profound indifference. He came to me, Ash said. It wasn't clear if he meant Eli or someone else. Maybe neither. Maybe the sentence had no specific object because its subject was the entire situation descending on him out of the October dark. 3 weeks ago. He called the number He stopped. I have a number he's not supposed to have. His dad must have. Ash. Yeah. How long have you known? The rain, the idling cruiser down the street. Somewhere a block over, a dog barked twice and stopped. Long enough, Ash said. Ronan dropped the cigarette, put his boot on it. He didn't say anything for a moment that lasted approximately 1 geological era, and then he said, You brought us here. I told you there was a situation worth looking at. You told me it was financial fraud. It is financial fraud. Ash. The name, just the name, quiet and flat, containing within it the full weight of 6 years of riding together through weather and worse. Ash looked at him. His face was doing several things at once. The ex-detective composure layered over something raw, something that had been in the house since before the composure moved in. I didn't know for certain, Ash said, about the kids. I had suspicions. The fraud was documentable. I thought, he exhaled, I thought if we could get the financial angle moving, it would pull the rest of it up with it. And the boy, your nephew? I didn't know he had the photograph. Ash's voice was level, but something underneath it was not level at all. I didn't know I didn't know how far it had gone. His father and I don't. He stopped again. Started again. I should have gone to Sandra directly. I kept thinking there was a cleaner way to do this. There's no clean way, Ronan said. There's only through. Inside the diner, visible through the rain-blurred window, Eli sat alone in booth 7 where Ronan had left him. He was looking at the table. His hand was pressed against his left side again, against the place in his hoodie where the photograph used to be, finding it empty. Ash looked at the boy through the window for a long moment. Something in his expression, the thing behind the ex-detective composure, cracked slightly, the way ice cracks when the temperature changes. Not all at once. Just a hairline fault that changes the structure of everything. He looks like his dad, Ash said. Same eyes. Ronan said nothing. I left, Ash said. When things got bad with my brother, I left. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. The marriage, the drinking, the whole collapse. He paused. Eli would have been 8. Yeah, Ronan said. I'm not asking for. I know you're not. They stood in the rain. Down the street, the cruiser's engine turned over and it pulled slowly away from the curb, moving deeper into town rather than toward them. That was its own kind of message. We need to know what's in those files, Ronan said. The second folder in the photograph. I've been working on the foundation records for 2 weeks, Ash said. The fraud is real and it's substantial. 40,000 from this year's fundraiser alone, but that's just what I can see from public filings. If there are internal records, he's covering something else. Yeah. Bigger than the money. Has to be. Ronan looked at the window where Eli was still sitting, still pressing his hand against an empty lining. The boy said there's another kid, Marcus Webb, 8th grade. Ash went very still. You know that name, Ronan said. Marcus Webb's father, Ash said carefully, is Garrett Webb, who is on the Milford Ridge Town Council, who has been the primary public defender of the Junior Athletics Foundation budget for 3 consecutive fiscal years. He paused. Who is also the man who called the county commissioner when the last investigation into Voss's financial records was opened. The rain fell. So the kid's father is protecting the man who hurt his kid, Ronan said. The kid's father doesn't know, Ash said. Or he knows, and he doesn't know. Both things can be true. He said this with the tone of a man who had spent a decade in law enforcement watching both things be true simultaneously, and it had cost him something he couldn't fully account for. The diner door opened. Parrish appeared in the doorway. Kid's mother just pulled into the lot, he said. What? Sandra Mercer moved through the parking lot, the way a woman moves when she is trying to hold 2 versions of herself together simultaneously, the version that is frightened and the version that is not going to show it. She was 41 and looked it honestly. Dark circles that makeup didn't cover anymore. A coat she'd grabbed on her way out that was more fall than winter, hair still damp at the ends from a shower she'd taken an hour ago before Darren's call. She navigated between the Harleys with her shoulders turned inward, not touching, moving through the gauntlet of motorcycles and leather-jacketed men, the way a person moves through a space that their body is telling them is dangerous and their mind is telling them to calm down about. The saints in the parking lot watched her. Nobody moved to block her. Nobody spoke. The watching itself was enough to feel like something. She pushed through the diner door. The bell above it jangled. Eli looked up from the booth. His face did something complicated. Relief and dread arriving simultaneously, the specific expression of a child who loves a parent and has been failed by them and cannot stop doing both. Eli. Sandra crossed the diner. She slid into the seat across from him, Ronan's seat, still warm from his coffee cup. She reached across the table and put her hand on his arm, over the hoodie, over the place where the bruise was. He let her. Barely. Come on, baby. Let's go home. Mom? Darren called me, she said. Her voice was carefully neutral. He said you were here and that there were... She glanced toward the window and the parking lot of motorcycles beyond it. He said he was worried. Was worried? Eli's voice had gone very flat. Eli, he called you to come get me. He was concerned. He called you to come get me because I was talking to someone. Eli's voice stayed flat the whole way through it, and there was something more frightening about that flatness than there would have been about anger. Anger would have been easier for Sandra to dismiss. The flatness was the voice of a boy who had passed through anger and come out the other side somewhere colder and more permanent. Someone who actually listened. Sandra looked at the table. Her hand was still on his arm. Baby, these men didn't call you to come get me away from them, Eli said. He did. Think about that. The diner was very quiet. Ruby was behind the counter doing the thing people do when they are witnessing something private in a public space. Not watching, not watching. The saints in their booths had their heads down, but their attention was absolute. Sandra Mercer sat with her son's words in the silence, and the particular difficulty of that silence was that she knew, somewhere in the exhausted, frightened, overloaded operating system of herself, that he was right. She had known it for weeks. She had known it in the same way a person knows there's a smell in the house that shouldn't be there and keeps deciding it's probably nothing, because finding what's causing it would require taking something apart. I can't do this right now, she said. Her voice broke on the last word. Just slightly. Enough. I know, Eli said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The bruises under his hoodie were invisible to the room, and both of them were aware of that invisibility, had maintained it, him by hiding and her by not looking, and the weight of that shared evasion sat between them on the laminate table like something that needed to be named. The door opened. Ronan came back in from the rain, wet jacket, wet hair, boots leaving dark prints on the tile. He read the scene in approximately 2 seconds and sat down at the counter instead of returning to the booth, giving them space, which was its own kind of presence. Sandra looked at him, at the patch on his chest, at the quiet of him. Are you... She stopped, tried again. Did my son come to you? He came to me, Ronan said. And you... I listened. She looked at Ronan the way people look at things they're trying to make a decision about. Then she looked at Eli. Then she did something that Ruby would remember for the rest of her life. because it was the bravest and most ordinary thing she saw in the whole extraordinary mess of those days. Sandra Mercer put her face in her hands and breathed. Just breathed. In and out, slow and ragged and real, the breathing of a woman giving herself 30 seconds to stop performing. When she took her hands down, her eyes were red, her jaw was set. "What do you need?" she said to Ronan. "Time," Ronan said. "And your son needs to stay somewhere that's not his house tonight." Sandra went rigid. "Why?" "Because Voss knows Eli talked to me," Ronan said. He kept his voice even and quiet and delivered the sentence the way a surgeon delivers the name of something, without ornament, with complete precision. "He's known for about an hour. By now he's run through his options, and one of his options involves making sure the only physical evidence of what's in that truck is no longer in your house." The color left Sandra's face in the specific way color leaves a face when a person realizes that the thing they've been afraid to look at has been looking at them the entire time. "My house," she said. "He knows where you live. He's been—" She stopped. She thought about the 3 visits in the past 2 weeks. The sympathy. The carefully worded conversations about Eli's emotional instability, his difficulty adjusting, how trauma sometimes manifests as false narratives in children under stress. The particular quality of Darren Voss's concern. "He's been watching my house. He's been managing you," Ronan said. No judgment in it, just the fact, placed in front of her without decoration. Sandra Mercer looked at her son. Eli looked back at her with those pale blue eyes, his uncle's eyes, though neither of them knew his uncle was 30 feet away in the parking lot with rain on his shoulders and his own reckoning to settle, and said nothing because there was nothing left to say. And then the front window of Ruby's diner exploded inward. Not a gunshot, a rock, a piece of broken asphalt the size of a fist, thrown from the dark parking lot with enough force to clear the glass entirely and hit the far wall above the coffee station, leaving a hole in the window that let in a rush of cold, rain-smelling air. Everyone in the diner dropped. Training, instinct, adrenaline. Everyone went down. Ruby behind the counter, the couple in the booth, the old man with the crossword in his shirt pocket, graceless but fast, down onto the sticky tile. Eli had his mother's arm. Ronan was already moving, off the stool, between the booth and the window, body between the opening and the people in the room, with a speed and deliberateness that was not dramatic, was purely functional. The motion of a man whose body remembered what it was supposed to do long before his conscious mind caught up. Outside, engines, not bikes. A truck. 2 trucks. Headlights sweeping the lot. The sound of tires on wet gravel moving fast. Voices. Not many, but not careful about being heard. From the parking lot came a different sound. The Iron Saints, mobilizing. Not chaotic. Not loud. Just suddenly and completely in motion, the way a military unit moves, boots on asphalt, engines turning over, the specific orchestrated response of men who had been waiting for something to happen and had known, in the professional sense, that something would. Dex appeared in the broken window frame, not through the door, through the hole, stepping through shattered glass with complete disregard for the shards, and looked at Ronan. 2 trucks, Dex said. Local plates. They're running, but they're not gone yet. Parrish has the east end blocked. Ronan looked at Eli. Eli was on the floor, his mother's arm in one hand, glass in his hair, and his face had that specific expression that Ronan recognized with a certainty that went all the way down to the base of him, because he had worn that expression himself at a different age, in a different life, the expression of a person who is afraid but is also, underneath the fear, completely unsurprised, because they have been waiting for exactly this. "He sent them," Eli said. His voice was steady, steadier than it had any right to be. "He sent someone to scare us." "Yeah," Ronan said, "because I talked to you." "Yeah." Eli looked at the broken window, at the rain coming in through the hole, at the parking lot beyond it where the Iron Saints moved like a storm system that had decided on its direction. "He's going to say I did this," Eli said. "He's going to find a way to say I caused this, or you caused this, and everyone's going to believe him because everyone always—" "Eli." Ronan crouched down to his level, eye to eye, November Creek eyes in the bad fluorescent light. "Listen to me." Eli stopped. "Not everyone checked," Ronan said. "Not anymore." From outside came the sound of Parrish's voice, and then a truck engine cutting off, and then a silence more loaded than the noise had been. Ronan stood up. He looked at Dex. "Get Ash." Dex looked at him for a half second. "Ash is already here." "I know," Ronan said. "Get him anyway. It's time." And in the parking lot, in the rain, under the broken neon of Ruby's diner, Ash Mercer was already walking toward the door. Toward the nephew he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, toward the wreckage of a family he'd abandoned when it was inconvenient, toward a truth that had been building itself quietly in this small Kentucky town long enough that there was no longer any distance between himself and the moment he had been, in every way that counted, running from. The door opened. Eli looked up, and every single thing that was about to happen became, in that instant, completely inevitable. Part 3 is where everything breaks open. Nobody walks out of it the same. Stay with me. Ash Mercer walked through the door of Ruby's diner, and the first thing he saw was his nephew's face. Not the bruises. Those were still hidden under 3 layers of fabric and 3 months of practiced concealment. Not the fear. Eli had gotten good enough at managing his face that the fear lived mostly in the peripheral details. The thumbnail against the table edge, the hand pressed to the empty jacket lining. What Ash saw was the eyes. Pale blue, almost gray in the bad fluorescent light, and identical, structurally, genetically, with the specificity of DNA that doesn't negotiate, to the eyes of the man Ash had stopped returning calls from 3 years ago. His brother, Thomas Mercer, who was currently somewhere in Lexington or Louisville or wherever a man goes when he loses his family in installments and decides the losing is easier than the staying. Eli looked at the man who had just walked in from the rain, and his face did something it hadn't done in months. It cracked. Not all the way. Just enough to show what was underneath, which was a boy who had been alone for a very long time in a way that had nothing to do with being in a room by himself. "Hey, kid," Ash said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He hadn't rehearsed this. He'd spent 3 weeks telling himself he'd find the right time, the right words, the right configuration of honesty and apology that would make the conversation manageable. What he had instead was a broken diner window letting in October rain and his nephew looking at him from the floor with glass in his hair. Eli said nothing for 5 full seconds. Then, "You know him." Not a question. Eli looked from Ash to Ronan and back to Ash, and the pale blue eyes were doing the calculation with a speed that made Ash's chest tighten, because it was the same calculation he'd seen Thomas make 1,000 times. His brother had that same quality, the ability to process social geometry faster than most people noticed it was happening. "Yeah," Ash said. "I know him." "How long have you been here? In Milford Ridge?" Another calculation. Ash could see it landing. "You came here for this," Eli said. You brought them here for this." Eli, "How long have you known?" Eli's voice was quiet the way a wire under tension is quiet, taut, humming with something that hadn't released yet. "About Coach Voss." "How long?" Ash crouched down. Glass crunched under his boot. Sandra was still on the floor beside Eli, her arm around his shoulders, watching Ash with an expression that was entirely unreadable because it was composed equally of recognition. She knew who Ash was, had met him twice at family events before the estrangement, and something harder. The particular expression of a woman who is recalculating how many people knew things she should have been told. "I had suspicions," Ash said. 3 months. 3 months, Eli repeated. "I didn't have proof. I called you." Eli's voice dropped another register, which was somehow louder than volume. "I found your number in my dad's old phone. I called the number 3 weeks ago. You talked to me for 6 minutes, and then you said you'd look into it." "I know." "You didn't tell me you were already here." "No." "You didn't tell me you knew people who could help." "No." "Why?" The word landed in the middle of the broken glass diner floor like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples from it went out in every direction, toward Ronan standing at the counter, toward Dex in the window frame, toward Sandra whose arm had tightened around Eli's shoulders, toward the whole accumulated weight of a family that had been fracturing since before this boy was old enough to understand fractures. Ash looked at his nephew. He had a dozen answers, and every one of them was true, and none of them was sufficient, and he was old enough and had been a detective long enough to know the difference. Because I wasn't sure I had the right to show up, Ash said. After everything, with your dad. I didn't know if you'd want... I was alone, Eli said. 3 words. Absolute. The plainest sentence in the English language deployed as a weapon and as a wound simultaneously. Ash took it without moving away from it, which was the only honest thing left to do. Yeah, he said. You were. That's on me. Ashad. Ronan gave them 4 minutes. He timed it internally the way he timed everything, not with anxiety, but with the professional awareness of a man who understood that emotional reckonings had to be given their minimum necessary space and no more. Because outside in the wet parking lot, Parrish had 2 men from those trucks face down on wet asphalt. And that situation had a shelf life measured in minutes before it became a different kind of problem. He touched Ash's shoulder once as he passed. Ash stood up. The conversation between him and Eli wasn't finished. It wouldn't be finished for months, possibly years, possibly ever. But it was paused, and paused was functional. Outside, the rain had not let up. Parrish was a big man. Not Ronan's kind of big, which was contained, but the kind of big that looked like it had been built specifically for standing in doorways. He had a hand on each of the 2 men on the asphalt, not roughly, but with the complete and absolute assurance of someone who knew the men weren't going anywhere. The 2 trucks that had swept through the lot, a black F-250 and an older Chevy Silverado with a cracked taillight, were now blocked front and back by Saints bikes, not aggressively, just comprehensively. A 12-point geometry problem where every solution led to the same answer. The 2 men on the ground were young, mid-20s, work boots, Carhartt jackets, the general appearance of men who did things with their hands for a living and had been asked to do something different tonight by someone they didn't say no to. One of them had a bloody nose from going down on the gravel. He kept trying to get his elbows under him. Parrish applied negligible additional pressure to his shoulder, and he stopped. Ronan crouched in front of the one without the bloody nose. This one was trying to look like he wasn't frightened, which meant he was frightened. Who sent you? Ronan said. I don't know what you're... You threw a rock through a diner window, Ronan said. There's a woman and a child in there. You want to keep the story simple. Keep it simple. Who sent you? The man looked at the ground, at the gravel, at the rain hitting the gravel, at the row of Harleys surrounding him like a standing jury. I want a lawyer, he said. You want a lawyer, Ronan repeated. He said it without inflection. He looked at the man for a moment. You know what's interesting about that? Lawyers are for when you're talking to police. I'm not police. He paused. Deputy Price drove by here an hour ago and didn't stop. You understand what that tells me? The man said nothing. It tells me Deputy Price already knew something was going to happen, which means he decided not to be here for it. Ronan let that breathe for a second. Which means you're on your own. Whatever Darren Voss told you this was, an easy job, a quick thing, nobody gets hurt. He left you in this parking lot without backup and drove home. You want to think about that. The man's jaw worked. He looked up for the first time. His eyes were doing the recalculation. I got a family, he said. So does that kid in there, Ronan said. Silence. Voss, the man said. His voice had gone flat and defeated. The specific flatness of a person who has just decided that loyalty is a door that only opens from the inside. Coach Voss. He said there was a biker harassing one of his players. Said it was a club thing, and the sheriff had asked him to help discourage... He stopped. Heard himself. He said nobody was supposed to get hurt, just break a window, make noise. Where is he now? I don't know. Where does he go when something goes wrong? The man looked at his hands on the wet asphalt. He's got a storage unit out on Route 9, past the grain elevator. I don't know what he keeps there. I've seen him go there. When things get... He stopped again. Ronan stood up. He looked at Ash, who had come out of the diner and was standing 2 feet behind him in the rain, listening. Ash's face had changed. The ex-detective composure was still there, but something had moved underneath it. Something that had been moved by the word storage unit specifically, moved with the urgency of a man recognizing a piece that fits into a picture he'd been assembling for months. The second folder, Ronan said. Yeah, Ash said. It's there. Has to be. They looked at each other in the rain. The unspoken conversation between them was fast and comprehensive, the shorthand of men who had ridden together through enough weather to trust each other's instincts without requiring the full sentence. "We go tonight," Ash said. "We go tonight," Ronan said. The Iron Saints moved out of Ruby's parking lot in two groups at 10:45, engines low, lights on, moving through the wet Milford Ridge streets with the deliberate quiet of an organization that understood the difference between presence and aggression. Dex took 14 men north toward the storage units on Route 9. Ronan stayed at the diner with Parrish and 4 others, because Sandra Mercer and her son were not going home tonight, and someone needed to make sure the understanding of that fact was complete and mutual. Eli watched them go from the diner window, the broken one, rain coming through the hole in gusts. His mother was on the phone with her sister in Bowling Green. Her voice was low and controlled, and had that specific quality of controlled that exists directly on top of something uncontrolled, like concrete poured over a crack. Ash sat across from Eli in booth 7. The table between them was the same table, the same laminate scratch, different weight in the air above it. "Your dad," Ash said. "Does he know any of this?" Eli shook his head, then, "Mom doesn't tell him things anymore. They don't really. It's mostly just texts about scheduling." Ash nodded. He looked at his hands. He had his brother's hands, too. Same knuckle structure, same tendency to hold them flat on surfaces when thinking. A Mercer family tic that neither of them had ever consciously observed in themselves. "He'd want to know," Ash said. "Maybe," Eli said. Then, "He left." "I know." "You left too." "Yeah." Ash held the fact of it without dressing it up. "I did." "Why does everyone leave?" Eli said it without self-pity, which was worse than if it had had self-pity in it. It was a genuine inquiry, the reasonable question of an 11-year-old who had assembled the available data and arrived at a pattern. Ash didn't have an answer that was good enough. He had the truth, which was that men leave because staying requires a kind of courage that isn't dramatic or visible. And dramatic, invisible courage was something men like him and his brother had in abundance when it came to the wrong situations, and almost none of when it came to the right ones. He didn't say this because Eli was 11. He filed it under things to say later, and hoped later arrived. "I'm not leaving," Ash said. "Not this time." Eli looked at him with those pale blue eyes. He didn't say promise. He didn't say okay. He said nothing at all. And the nothing contained very precisely the information that he had heard similar sentences before and had learned to hold them lightly. The storage facility on Route 9 was a standard rural Kentucky operation. 2 rows of orange corrugated metal doors under sodium vapor lights, a chain link perimeter, a keypad at the gate that hadn't been updated since the previous decade. Dex's group arrived and deployed with the unhurried efficiency of men to whom the word perimeter was a native language. The gate was unlocked. Not forced. Unlocked. Keypad showing a recent entry timestamp, 10:52 p.m. Dex looked at the timestamp, looked at the open gate. "He's here," he said. They went in slow. Unit 14 was at the far end of the second row, its orange door rolled up halfway, the interior lit by a battery-powered work light hanging from the ceiling strut. From 15 feet away, Dex could see papers, a folding table, filing boxes, a laptop with its screen glowing, and Darren Voss standing at the table with his back to the entrance, feeding documents into a shredder. Dex stopped the group with one raised fist. He watched. Voss was systematic, unhurried, working through a stack of papers with the focused efficiency of a man who had thought about this moment and prepared for it. Not panicking. That was the detail that lodged itself in Dex's chest like something with a barb. Not panicking. This was a man who had contingency plans. A man who had done this before. Dex walked forward alone. His boots on the concrete were quiet enough, but not quiet enough. Voss turned. He was exactly what the television had suggested. Broad shoulders, clean face, the particular physical confidence of an athlete whose body still remembered being 22. His eyes moved from Dex to the darkness beyond him, calculating the numbers. The calculation took approximately 2 seconds. "You're trespassing," Voss said. His voice was steady. That steadiness, In a unit full of documents he was destroying at 10:55 at night, with a row of iron saints materialized out of the dark behind a man he'd never met. That steadiness was the single most frightening thing Dex had encountered in a year of situations that included several actual firearms. "So are you," Dex said. He looked at the shredder, at the documents, at the laptop. "Step away from the table." "I'm going to call the sheriff." "Price," Dex said. "Yeah, do that." He tilted his head slightly. "Ask him how his conversation with Darren Voss went 2 hours ago. The one where Darren told him about the situation at Ruby's Diner, and Price decided to drive by without stopping." Voss's expression didn't change. It didn't change in the specific way that trained expressions don't change when they're being maintained under pressure, which requires effort that is visible if you know what maintained effort looks like. "I don't know what you think you know," Voss said. "We got the photograph," Dex said. A pause. Minimal. Calibrated. "What photograph?" "The one an 11-year-old kid took through your truck window 3 weeks ago. The cache. The foundation files. The second folder." Dex took 2 more steps forward, stopping just outside the radius of the work light, where the shadow from the corrugated ceiling fell across the upper half of his face. "We don't have what's in the second folder yet, but you're standing in front of a shredder at 11 o'clock at night, so we have a working theory." Voss was quiet. He looked at the table, at the shredder, at the laptop. Then he did something Dex didn't anticipate. He sat down. In the folding chair next to the table, slowly, like a man sitting down at the end of a long day, and he looked at Dex and the darkness behind Dex with an expression that had entirely stopped performing anything. "How much has the boy said?" Voss asked. The question, the specific phrasing of it, the complete absence of denial in it, went through Dex like a current. He kept his face still. "Enough," Dex said. "The web kid?" Dex said nothing. "Marcus won't talk," Voss said. "His father—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. Not remorse. Something more functional than remorse. The expression of a man assessing structural vulnerabilities in a collapsing situation. "Garrett Webb has too much to lose. He knows it. I know it. That's been the arrangement." "What arrangement?" Dex said. Voss looked at him. "Webb knew," he said simply. "Not everything, not at first, but enough. And when he figured out enough, he made a choice." He looked at the stack of papers in the shredder basket. He chose the foundation, the money, the reputation. He chose all the things that men choose when the other option is looking at what they let happen. Dex stared at him. A father, a town council member, a man who had received information about what was happening to his own son and had made a calculation. "Where's the rest of it?" Dex said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "The files. What's in the second folder?" Voss looked at him for a long moment. "Names," he said. The work light hummed. The shredder sat full of confetti that used to be a paper trail. "How many?" Dex said. "This county and 2 others," Voss said. 8 years? Dex's phone was in his hand before he fully decided to reach for it. He had Ronan's number up. He was already typing when Voss said, not loudly, not with any particular theater, "The laptop has a remote wipe. If I don't enter a code in—" He glanced at his watch. 4 minutes, it wipes. Dex stopped. Voss looked at him with the eyes of a man who had just re-identified the only leverage he had left and was using it with complete deliberateness. "I want to talk to the sheriff," Voss said. "Not Price, the actual sheriff. And I want it on the record that I cooperated." The work light hummed. Outside, one of the saints shifted weight and gravel crunched under a boot, and somewhere on Route 9 a semi went past in the rain and the world continued its indifferent rotation. Dex looked at the laptop. He looked at Voss. He looked at the 4 minutes on the watch. He thought about Eli Mercer in a diner booth, pressing his hand against an empty lining. He thought about Marcus Webb walking through school hallways with parentheses shoulders. He thought about 8 years and 2 counties and a folder full of names that a shredder hadn't gotten to yet. 2 minutes, Dex said. "I make a call. You don't touch that laptop. Someone breathes wrong in this room. The deal is done." He stepped outside into the rain, put the phone to his ear. Ronan picked up on the first ring. "We've got a problem," Dex said. and it's bigger than Voss. A pause on the line. Wind through it. The distant low throb of a bike engine somewhere. How much bigger? Ronan said. Garrett Webb knew, Dex said, about his own kid. He knew, and he covered it. He paused. And Voss has names, other kids, other counties. 8 years of it, Ronan. The silence on the line was the silence of something fundamental shifting. How much is already shredded? Ronan asked. Some. The laptop has what's left. He wants a deal. The actual sheriff, not Price. Does the actual sheriff know about Price? Ronan said. Dex hadn't considered this. He considered it now, in the rain outside Unit 14, and the considering of it opened a trap door under the whole situation, because if Price had been running interference for Voss, the question of what the sheriff knew and when was not a simple question, and the answer to it had determined whether walking into the sheriff's office with Darren Voss and a laptop full of evidence ended with a conviction or with a phone call from the sheriff's office to a county commissioner whose name might also be in that second folder. I don't know, Dex said. Then we don't take him to the sheriff's office, Ronan said. Not yet. We need to know what's on that laptop first. All of it. Before anyone official knows we have it. But he won't give us access without the deal. Then we need leverage he doesn't know we have yet. Dex looked back through the unit door at Darren Voss sitting in his folding chair, watch on his wrist, waiting with the patience of a man who believed he still had the dominant position. What leverage? Dex said. Ash, Ronan said. Ash spent 3 years as a detective before he left. He worked financial crimes. He's been in those foundation records for 2 weeks. A pause. Ash, tell him. A shuffle on the line. Then Ash's voice, slightly breathless, like a man who had just run to wherever Ronan was standing. The foundation accounts, Ash said. Voss has been siphoning, but the accounts aren't just in his name. There's a secondary signatory on the main disbursement account, has been since the foundation was established. Another pause. It's Garrett Webb. Dex stood very still. Webb isn't just a witness, Ash said. He's a co-conspirator on the financial fraud, which means if Voss goes down for the money, Webb goes down with him. And Webb knows that. Which means Webb has been protecting Voss not just because of his son, he's been protecting him to protect himself. Does Voss know we know this? Dex said. No, Ash said. Dex looked at the watch on Voss's wrist, looked at the laptop. What does that change? Dex said. It means Voss isn't the only one with leverage, Ash said. It means Webb is a pressure point we can use. It means... His voice shifted. Something went through it, a frequency change, a tightness. It means Marcus Webb's own father has been in that room with Voss and his son's case files and made the decision to bury them. And Marcus doesn't know that. The rain, the sodium vapor lights, Dex standing with a phone at his ear outside a storage unit containing 8 years of evidence and the man who created it. Marcus will talk, Dex said. When he finds out his father, if he finds out, Ash said, if we tell him, if we can get to him before Voss's people do. He paused. And if we can get to him before Garrett Webb realizes that we have the financial records and decides to take his family and disappear. Dex pulled the phone from his ear for a second. He looked at the unit door. He looked at the rain. He had been in situations before where the thing you were dealing with turned out to be a surface under which a larger thing was moving. He had been in those situations enough times to know the specific sensation of the ground shifting under your understanding of what you were standing on. He put the phone back. Ronan, he said. Voss said names, other counties, 8 years. He said it like a man who knows the scope of it makes him harder to touch. He's right, Ronan said. Which means some of the names in that second folder are people who have already used their position to make other things go away, Ronan said. His voice was very quiet now. And if they know we have it? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Dex looked at Unit 14, at the orange corrugated door, at the work light glowing inside it, at Darren Voss in his folding chair with his watch on his wrist, and his leverage and his 8 years and his names. He looked at all of it, and he understood, with the comprehensive certainty of a man who had been trained to assess situations accurately, even when accuracy was the most uncomfortable available option, that they had walked into Milford Ridge following a thread, and the thread had led not to a knot but to a network, a web of complicity and silence and institutional protection that went far beyond one coach in one county, and that the 11-year-old boy sitting in a diner 2 miles away with glass in his hair had been, without knowing it, carrying evidence that people in positions of actual power had actual reasons to make disappear, along with anyone holding it. He went back into Unit 14. He looked at Voss. "New deal," he said. "You're going to open that laptop right now, and you're going to let my associate copy every file on it, every file. Nothing gets wiped. And then," he paused, "then we're going to have a conversation about Garrett Webb." Voss's expression moved for the first time. Not much, but enough. "Webb," he said carefully. "You've been carrying him for 3 years," Dex said. "His name on your accounts, his silence for your protection, his son's case in a folder." He held the man's eyes. "How long do you think that arrangement holds when we tell him his financial exposure just became our leverage instead of yours?" Something in Voss's face, the architecture of the maintained expression, developed a fault line, hairline, barely visible. But Dex had been watching people's faces under pressure since he was 19 years old, and he saw it. "Open the laptop," Dex said. Voss's hand moved to the keyboard, stopped. He looked at Dex with an expression that had shed the last of its performance and was simply, now, the face of a man cornered at the end of a long series of choices, each of which had seemed survivable in isolation. "If this comes out," Voss said, "all of it, the full scope, there are people in this situation with the resources to make problems." "I know," Dex said, "real problems, not rocks through windows." "I know what you mean," Dex said. "Open the laptop." Voss opened it, and in the blue-white glow of the screen, in the rain-wet dark of a Kentucky storage unit at 11:17 on a Tuesday night, the full inventory of 8 years began to reveal itself. And it was so much worse than anyone had been prepared for. And it put a target on every single person who now knew it existed. And the only question left was whether the Iron Saints had enough people, enough time, and enough of the right kind of ruthlessness to do what was now, unavoidably, completely, and with no remaining exit, required of them. Everything changes in Part 4. For everyone. No exceptions. Don't go anywhere. The files loaded slowly on the laptop screen, the way bad news always arrives. Not all at once, but in increments, each one worse than the last, each one requiring a separate moment of absorption before the next one hit. Dex stood behind Voss and read. He didn't touch the keyboard. He didn't need to. Voss had opened the folder structure with the resigned efficiency of a man who had already done the math and understood that the variables had changed. The main directory held 11 subfolders. Each subfolder was labeled with a year. The earliest was dated 8 years back. The most recent had files added 4 days ago. Dex read for 6 minutes without speaking. Then he took his phone out and called Ash. "Get here," he said. "Now, bring your laptop." He hung up. He looked at Voss, who was sitting in his folding chair looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man who has stopped managing his face because there is no longer a face worth managing. "The names in the third subfolder," Dex said, "the ones under the heading Advisory Board, those are real people." "Yes," Voss said. "County Commissioner, 2 state legislators, a federal." Dex stopped. He looked at the screen again to make sure he was reading it right. He was. "A federal prosecutor." "Regional office," Voss said. "He's been there 11 years. Dex stood very still. The work light hummed. Rain hit the corrugated roof in the particular rhythm of Kentucky October rain, which is heavier and more deliberate than rain in most places, as if the weather has an opinion. "These aren't donors," Dex said. "These people knew." "Some knew everything," Voss said. "Some knew enough. The prosecutor," he paused. "He killed the investigation in Harlan County 2 years ago. The one that was getting close. He killed it. He had standing, he had jurisdiction. He made phone calls." Voss's voice was flat the whole way through, the flatness of a man reciting facts he has been living with long enough that they've lost their texture. The money moved through the foundation accounts in ways that implicated enough people that taking down one thread would pull on threads belonging to men who had the power to make investigations stop. A protection network, Dex said. I didn't build it that way, Voss said. I don't care how you built it. I'm saying it grew, Voss said. The money started small. The foundation was legitimate at first. There are kids who genuinely benefited from the programs. Then the money got bigger, and the people who wanted a piece of it got more powerful, and the thing I'd done, the other thing, became currency. Became the thing I used to keep them invested in protecting the whole structure. His jaw moved. That's what the second folder is. That's what the names are. That's the architecture. Dex looked at him. You used what you did to those kids, Dex said carefully, as leverage. Yes, you made powerful men complicit in covering it up so they'd have as much reason as you to keep it buried. Yes, the rain on the roof, the hum of the light. You built yourself a bunker, Dex said, out of other people's crimes. Voss said nothing. He looked at his hands. And you've been living in it for 8 years, Dex said. Still nothing. Dex's phone rang. It was Ronan. He picked up and walked to the unit door, turning his back to Voss, which was a calculated risk he took because Holloway was 4 feet from Voss, with his arms crossed, and the focused attention of a man who had been given one simple job. Talk, Ronan said before Dex could speak. It's a network, Dex said. He kept his voice low. County level and above. Financial and otherwise. He's got a federal prosecutor on the list, Ronan. Regional office. The man shut down the Harlan County investigation. A silence on the line. How solid is the documentation? Ronan asked. 11 subfolders. 8 years. Transaction records. Communications. Dates. Dex paused. If half of this is what it looks like, walking this into any official law enforcement office in this region is walking it into a building where at least one person has a reason to make it disappear. Or make us disappear, Ronan said. Yeah. Another silence. Longer. Dex could hear the rain on Ronan's end, which meant he was outside. He could hear Ronan thinking, which was not a metaphor. There was a specific quality to the silence of Ronan Creed's active thinking that men who'd known him long enough could identify. A density to it, a weight. Copy everything, Ronan said. Every file, multiple drives. We split them up before dawn. He paused. And Dex, does anyone outside this unit know what's on that laptop? Just us, Dex said. And Voss? Voss is coming with us, Ronan said. He doesn't go home. He doesn't make calls. He sits where we put him until we figure out who in this county we can actually trust. He's going to want his deal. He'll get a deal when I know there's someone left to make a deal with, Ronan said. Tell him that. Dex turned back to the unit. He looked at Voss. You heard that? He said. It wasn't a question. Voss looked at the floor. Yeah. You got a problem with it? Voss looked up. In his eyes was something that Dex hadn't expected and didn't know exactly what to do with. Not defiance, not fear, but something tired and old and almost, not quite, but almost, looking for a place to set down the thing it had been carrying. No, Voss said. I don't have a problem with it. Ash arrived at 11:41 with 2 USB drives and his own laptop in a worn canvas bag, moving through the unit door with the fast, low center of gravity walk of a man who had been receiving bad news in installments for 3 weeks and had decided that the installment plan was over. He looked at the screen. He sat down. He started copying. He didn't look at Voss. Voss didn't look at him. The absence of that eye contact had its own specific texture. The texture of 2 men in a space that is too small for the history between them, where one of them had spent years doing something the other one's nephew had been trying to report for months. Ash copied files for 22 minutes with the focused speed of a man working against a clock he couldn't see but could feel. His hands were completely steady. This was not because he was calm. He was not calm, had not been calm since the moment Ronan called him back at Ruby's Diner and said the words 8 years in 2 other counties, but because he had learned in a decade of detective work that the hands have to stay steady even when everything else is operating at a frequency that would show up on a seismograph. At 11:58, his phone vibrated. He looked at it once, briefly, and the expression that crossed his face was the expression of a man receiving information that confirmed something he hoped was wrong. He stood up, looked at Dex. Garrett Webb just left his house, Ash said. My contact at the county building has him on traffic camera heading west on Route 12. He paused. He's got a bag in the back seat. Dex looked at him. He's running. Oh, either he figured out we have the financial records or Voss. Ash glanced at Voss, whose expression had shifted very slightly, very quickly, and then gone neutral again. Ash looked at him for a full 3 seconds. Or Voss contacted him. I haven't, Voss started. When? Ash said. I didn't. When did you contact him? Ash said. His voice had dropped an entire register, the specific drop that happens when a man moves from professional to personal without announcing the transition. Voss looked at the table. Before you got here, before the hard drive copy. He paused. I used the laptop. One message. 30 seconds. Dex looked at Ash. Ash looked at Dex. He tipped him, Dex said. Which means Webb knows we have the financial records, Ash said. Which means Webb knows his name is in the folder. He turned, which means Marcus. He was already moving when Dex grabbed his arm. Think, Dex said. Don't run. Think. Ash stopped. His whole body was vibrating with the particular tension of a man whose instincts and training were running directly counter to each other. His instincts said go, now, move. His training said a man running on instinct in this situation makes mistakes that get people hurt. He breathed, once, twice. If Webb is running, Ash said, he either takes Marcus with him or he leaves him. He worked through it out loud, the detective habit, making the logic external so it could be examined. If he takes him, Marcus disappears with a man who chose the foundation over his own son, and we lose the one witness who can corroborate everything on that drive. He paused. If he leaves him, Dex said quietly, then Marcus is alone in a house in a town where Voss still has people. The work light hummed. We need to split, Ash said. Already happening, Dex said. He had his phone out, was texting with his thumb. Parrish takes 4 men to the Webb address. Now. We sit on the house, and nobody goes in, nobody comes out until we know Marcus is safe. He looked at Ash. You go with them. I should go after Webb. Parrish, Dex said. I need you coherent, not compromised. You go to the house, you talk to Marcus. You're the one who can do that without it turning into a situation. Ash looked at him. He knew Dex was right in the way that you know something is right when you don't want it to be. 5 minutes, Ash said. Give me 5 minutes to finish the copy. 4, Dex said. The Webb house was a colonial on a tree-lined street 3 blocks from the middle school, the kind of house that communicates stability and civic pride with the mild aggression of good landscaping. At 12:21 in the morning, it was dark in every window except one, a second-floor room at the back, where a thin line of light showed under a door that was visible from the driveway if you knew the angle. Parrish stopped the group half a block away. 4 Saints bikes killed their engines in sequence, rolling the last 50 yards in silence, the mechanical equivalent of a held breath. Ash was off his bike before it stopped rolling, which was not protocol, and Parrish let it go because some situations had their own protocol. The front door was unlocked. Not forced, unlocked. Left that way in the specific manner of a man who left in a hurry and stopped caring about things like locked doors approximately 30 seconds into realizing his situation. Ash went in alone. Parrish stayed at the door. 2 Saints covered the back and the side gate. The house smelled like dinner from hours ago, something with onions, and beneath it, that particular negative space smell of a house where someone has recently not been present who was supposed to be. The kind of absence that has a smell. Ash had noticed it first as a young detective in his 20s and had never been able to explain it to anyone who hadn't noticed it themselves. He went upstairs, the light under the back room door. He knocked. 2 knocks. Quiet. Nothing. Marcus, he said. Just the name. Quiet. A sound from inside. Movement. The specific sound of someone deciding whether to be where they are. My name is Ash Mercer, Ash said. I'm not police. I'm not anyone your dad sent. He paused. He hadn't planned this. He hadn't planned any of this. I'm the uncle of someone you know, Eli Mercer. He's safe. He's okay. He asked me to make sure you were okay, too. Eli had not said this. But Ash knew. with the bone-level certainty of a man who had spent an hour looking at his nephew across a diner table and reading him the way you read someone who shares your family's specific emotional vocabulary. That if Eli had thought of it, he would have said it. The door opened 3 inches. One eye, brown, wide, 13 years old, and carrying something in it that Ash recognized because he had spent months developing the instinct to recognize it. The specific expression of a child who has been waiting, without being able to articulate that they were waiting, for someone to come to the door. "Is my dad?" Marcus started. "He left," Ash said. Gentle but straight. Some gentlenesses are actually cruelties wearing soft clothing. "He got in his car about 40 minutes ago. You know where he might have gone?" Marcus looked at him for a long moment. He opened the door wider. He was in pajamas. Plaid flannel, a size too big, the kind of thing a 13-year-old wears when there's no one around to perform teenage indifference for. He was holding his phone with both hands, screen cracked at the corner, showing a text thread with Dad at the top that Ash could see had received no new messages in 2 hours. "He texted me at 11, Marcus said. "He said he had to go handle something. He said he'd be back." His voice was completely level. "He's not coming back." Ash looked at him. "You know that," Ash said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "How long have you known?" Marcus looked down at the phone, at the cracked screen, at the last unanswered text. "I heard him on the phone," Marcus said. "A few months ago. He was in his office with the door closed, but our house has—" He stopped. "The vent from his office goes into my closet. I've been able to hear phone calls since I was 9. He paused. "I heard him talking to Coach Voss about the foundation, about the money." Another pause, smaller. "About me." Ash waited. "He said—" Marcus's jaw tightened. He was 13 years old, and his jaw was tightening the way a 40-year-old man's jaw tightens, the way a person's jaw tightens when they have been holding something in a place that was not built to hold it. He said that what happened to me was unfortunate. That's the word he used, unfortunate, and that it was important for everyone involved to exercise discretion. He looked up. He knew what happened. He just decided— He stopped. "Yeah," Ash said. He decided. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway in his pajamas and held his cracked phone, and the thing that moved across his face was not a child's expression. It was the expression of someone who has just permanently closed a door inside themselves, not in anger, not with drama, but with the quiet finality of a person who has finished a calculation and accepted the result. "What do I do now?" he said. Ash looked at him. He thought about Eli in a diner booth 8 hours ago asking, "Why does everyone leave?" He thought about himself in a parking lot 3 years ago, deciding that his brother's collapse was not his problem. He thought about the specific and recurring human habit of choosing the version of a situation that required less of you. "You tell the truth," Ash said, "to the right people. We're going to help you find the right people." He paused. "Can you do that?" Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "Eli really talked to someone," he said. "Yeah." "And they listened?" "Yeah," Ash said. "They listened." Marcus Webb nodded once. He went to his closet and got his shoes. Come. Ronan got the call from Ash at 12:47, standing outside Ruby's diner in the rain where he'd been standing, more or less, for the past 2 hours, because the diner was where Eli and Sandra were, and the math on where Ronan needed to be was therefore not complicated. "Marcus is secure," Ash said. "He'll talk." "Good," Ronan said. "Webb is in the wind." "He won't get far," Ronan said. "Parrish will find him." He paused. "And the files?" 3 drives, split. Parrish has one, Dex has one, mine is in a place nobody finds without a map. He paused. "Ronan, the federal prosecutor." "Yeah." "We can't go local with this." "I know." "We can't go regional either. Anyone he could reach—" "I know," Ronan said. "I'm working on it." Ash paused. "Working on it how?" Ronan looked at the diner window. At the silhouette of Eli visible through the glass, still at the counter, still awake at 12:47 in the morning, a small silhouette in a gray hoodie that was 2 sizes too large. "I know a journalist," Ronan said. "Investigative, national. She's been working on institutional protection networks for 3 years. I helped her source a story in Indiana 18 months ago. He paused. She publishes. It's out of everyone's jurisdiction. It's in the public record before anyone can stop it. That's a big move, Ash said. Yeah, Ronan said. If it goes wrong, we're already in a fight with a federal prosecutor and a state legislator, Ronan said. Going big is the same risk as going quiet. At least going big has a chance of working. Ash was silent for a moment. She'll need the drives, he said. She'll get one. We keep two. He paused. Nobody moves on Voss officially until she has what she needs to publish. Once it's published, every local official who might have a reason to make this go away has more reason to distance themselves from it than to protect it. That's a 48-hour window minimum, Ash said. Probably more. Yeah, Ronan said. And in those 48 hours, Voss is sitting with your people in a storage unit, Webb is running, and we're holding evidence that a federal prosecutor would genuinely prefer didn't exist. Yeah, Ronan said. And we're doing all of this from a parking lot in Milford Ridge, Kentucky. Yeah, Ronan said. We are. The rain, the neon, the faint sound from inside the diner of Ruby refilling a coffee cup. Okay, Ash said. Okay, Ronan said. He hung up and stood in the rain for another minute. Then he went back inside. Eli was at the counter. He had a third hot chocolate, or possibly the same one, reheated. Ruby wasn't charging him regardless. And he was looking at nothing in particular with those pale eyes, the way a person looks when their brain has gone past the point of active processing and is simply running on the baseline power of existing. Ronan sat on the stool beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. My uncle, Eli said. He's okay? He's good, Ronan said. He's with a kid who needed someone to come to the door. Eli absorbed this. Marcus? Yeah. Eli put both hands around his hot chocolate mug. He looked at them. He had his uncle's hands. The Mercer family flat palm habit, the particular way of resting hands on surfaces as if testing whether the surface will hold. Is it going to work? Eli said. Ronan considered the question with the respect it deserved, which meant not dismissing it with easy reassurance and not burdening an 11-year-old with the full architecture of the 48-hour problem. We have what we need, Ronan said. The question now is what we do with it. And you know what to do? Ronan looked at the counter, at the scratch in the laminate that Eli had been tracing with his thumbnail for hours. I know what needs to happen. Getting there is... He paused. Getting there is the part that's going to take everything we've got. Eli nodded. He drank his hot chocolate. From outside came the sound of an engine. Not a Harley, a truck, moving fast, and not slowing down as it passed the diner, but slowing at the diner. Tires on wet gravel in the parking lot, headlights sweeping through the window. Parrish was outside. Ronan was on his feet before the truck fully stopped. The truck door opened. Deputy Macon Price stepped out into the rain. He was alone, out of uniform. Jeans, a Milford Ridge Eagles jacket, his service weapon on his hip in a civilian holster that meant he'd taken it off his duty belt and put it on his own. His face was doing something complicated. Not the practiced concern of a law enforcement officer performing a welfare check. Something raw, something that looked, in the wet neon light, like a man who has just been handed a piece of information that has rewritten his recent history and is still in the process of that rewriting. He looked at the saints in the parking lot. He looked at Parrish, who was very still and very large and positioned directly between Price and the diner door. I need to talk to Creed, Price said. Parrish looked at him, didn't move. I know about the drives, Price said. I know about Voss. He paused. He looked down at the gravel, then up again. My name isn't in those files. I want you to know that before anything else. My name isn't in them because I didn't take money and I didn't know about the kids. His jaw tightened. But I did protect Voss from the financial investigation 2 years ago because he told me it was a clerical issue and I believed him because I wanted to believe him because we've been friends since he stopped. He looked at his hands. I made choices. I know that. Parrish looked at the diner window. Ronan was already at the door. He stepped out into the rain and looked at Price across the parking lot, through the wet dark, through the amber light of Ruby's sign, and he took the full measure of the man standing there in his Eagles jacket with his service weapon and his recently restructured understanding of his own recent history. Why are you here? Ronan said. Because whoever you're planning to take this to, Price said. You need to know that the county sheriff got a call from the regional federal prosecutor's office 40 minutes ago. He paused. 40 minutes ago. In the middle of the night. Another pause. That's not a courtesy call. That's someone running containment. The rain fell. Ronan looked at Price, at the parking lot full of saints, at the diner behind him where an 11-year-old boy was holding a hot chocolate with both hands. How many people know you're here? Ronan said. Nobody, Price said. How do I know that? You don't, Price said. You take me at my word or you don't. He held Ronan's eyes. But if you're planning to move those drives in the next few hours, you need to know that someone with federal jurisdiction just called your county sheriff at 12:45 in the morning. And that means the window for moving them safely is smaller than you thought. Ronan stood in the rain. Every calculation he'd been running for the past 3 hours restructured itself simultaneously, the way a compass restructures itself when it finds north. Not smoothly, but with a definitive, irreversible click. He looked at Parrish. Get everyone, he said. All of them. Right now. Parrish was already moving. Ronan looked back at Price. You're with us or you're not. Decide. Price looked at him. At the diner. At the row of Harleys gleaming wet under the neon. I'm with you, he said. Then get inside, Ronan said. We've got maybe 2 hours before this whole thing either works or doesn't. And we need every... His phone rang. He looked at the screen. A number he knew. A number he hadn't called in 18 months, hadn't needed to call, had kept in his phone the way you keep certain things, not because you expect to use them, but because you know the day might come when you need them and you cannot afford to not have them. The journalist. She was calling him, which meant she already knew. Which meant someone had already contacted her, or she had already found something, or the story had already started moving through channels that none of them had opened. And the 48-hour window he'd been calculating had just collapsed into something much. Ronan answered on the second ring. You're in Milford Ridge, the journalist said. It wasn't a question. Her name was Claire Vasquez, and she had the voice of someone who had spent 15 years in rooms where people lied to her professionally. A voice stripped of surprise, operating purely on the frequency of information and its implications. How do you know that? Ronan said. Because I've been working this story for 11 months, she said. The Foundation Network. 3 counties, 2 state legislators, 1 federal prosecutor named Aldrich Bowen, who has been running interference on child endangerment investigations since he took the regional post. She paused. I've been trying to find the physical documentation for 6 months. Someone just anonymously sent me a partial file manifest from a storage unit on Route 9 in Milford Ridge, Kentucky, time-stamped 2 hours ago. Ronan looked at Price. Price, reading his expression, shook his head. Not me. That wasn't us, Ronan said. I know, Claire said. The metadata on the message traces to a cell tower on Route 12 west of Milford Ridge. Someone running, possibly, who wanted insurance before they disappeared. Garrett Webb. Webb had sent it. Running west on Route 12 with a bag in his back seat and his name on Voss's financial records, Webb had done the one thing a man in his position could do to buy himself some measure of safety. He had created a situation in which the story was already in motion, already in the hands of someone who would publish it, which meant that eliminating the evidence or the people who held it would no longer stop the story. It was a coward's move and a smart one, and it had, inadvertently, done exactly what Ash's 3 weeks of careful investigation had been building toward. I need the drives, Claire said. All of it. Whatever you have. I need 48 hours. You don't have 48 hours, she said. Bowen's office called the county sheriff at 12:45. I know because the sheriff's department scanner picked up an encrypted burst transmission 15 minutes later that my associate flagged. She paused. They're moving tonight, Ronan. Whatever they're planning to do to contain this, they're doing it in the next few hours. If you still have the evidence and they know where you are, they know where we are, Ronan said. A silence. How many people do you have? Claire asked. Enough, Ronan said. Then, maybe. I can have a secure uplink ready in 20 minutes, she said. You don't need to physically move the drives. You upload directly, everything. And the moment it hits my server, it's off your hands and in a jurisdiction that Bowen can't reach. And then? And then I publish, she said. Not in 48 hours, tonight. Morning edition online. By the time Bowen wakes up, it's in 20,000 inboxes. Ronan looked at the diner, at the parking lot of wet bikes, at the sky, which was doing what Kentucky October skies do at 1 in the morning, pressing down low and dark with the patient weight of something that had decided to stay. "Give me 15 minutes, he said. "You have 10, she said. "After that I publish what I have, which is enough to start the story, but not enough to finish it." He hung up. He looked at Price. "I need your phone's hotspot, departmental encryption." Price looked at him. I know what it is," Ronan said. "I'm asking if you'll do it." Price stood in the rain in his Eagles jacket for 3 seconds. 3 full seconds of a man looking at the accumulated weight of 25 years of choices and making one more. He took out his phone. "Tell me what to do," he said. "What?" Dex drove back from the storage unit at 119 with Voss in the passenger seat of Parrish's truck, hands zip-tied in front of him. Not cruelly, but completely. And the laptop bag on the seat between them. Voss had not spoken since the storage unit. He looked out the passenger window at the wet Kentucky dark with the expression of a man who had finished bargaining with the situation and was now simply inside it. When they pulled into Ruby's parking lot, the first thing Dex saw was Ash standing beside his bike with his phone in one hand and a USB drive in the other, and the second thing he saw was Ronan at the diner's side entrance with Price's phone in his hands and the focused expression of a man uploading the most important file of several people's lives on a departmental hotspot in a diner parking lot in the rain. Dex got out. He left Voss in the truck with Holloway. "How far along?" he said. 60%, Ronan said. He didn't look up. "Hold position." Dex held position. He stood in the rain and listened to the upload run and watched the lot and counted his people and did the math on whether 60% was going to become 100% before the next thing happened. The next thing happened at 73%. 2 vehicles. Not county. Not local plates. Dark SUVs, the kind that don't draw attention in daylight and draw all of it at 1:30 in the morning on a county road in Kentucky, moving with the particular speed of people who know their destination and have been authorized to arrive at it with authority. They turned into Ruby's lot. Ronan didn't look up from the phone. "How many?" 2 vehicles, Dex said. 4 people minimum per vehicle. 78%, Ronan said. "Keep them off me for 4 minutes. Dex turned. He gave Parrish one look, the look that contained in the shorthand of men who had been in motion together for years, the complete operational instruction. And Parrish nodded, and the Saints moved. Not aggressively, not with weapons drawn or voices raised. They simply moved into the positions that meant the SUVs could not reach the diner door, could not reach Ronan at the side entrance, could not move through the parking lot in any direction without moving through the Iron Saints, who stood in the rain with the immovable quality of men who had collectively decided that this particular piece of ground was the piece they were not leaving. The SUVs stopped. Doors opened. 3 federal agents and a man in a suit who was not an agent stepped out. The man in the suit was in his 50s. Silver-haired, wearing the expression of someone accustomed to walking into rooms and having them reorganize themselves around his presence. Aldrich Bowen, federal prosecutor, regional office. In person, at 1:30 in the morning, in a diner parking lot in Milford Ridge, Kentucky. Which meant he was frightened. A frightened man with federal authority was a specific kind of dangerous, the kind that moves fast and doesn't observe proportionality, and Dex registered this and held his position anyway. Bowen looked at the Saints. He looked at the arrangement of bodies between himself and the diner. "This is a federal matter," he said. His voice was the voice of a man who had used those 4 words to move obstacles for 20 years. "Step aside." Nobody moved. Bowen looked at the nearest Saint, a man named Garrett, 44 years old, former Army, forearms like architectural elements, and repeated it. "Step aside." "No, sir," Garrett said, politely. "Completely." Bowen looked at his agents. The agents were reading the arithmetic of the parking lot. 30-plus Saints, 4 of them, rural road, no backup within 15 minutes. And their body language was doing the recalculation that professional people do when the situation they walked into does not match the briefing they received. 89%, Ronan said from the side entrance. Still not looking up. Bowen turned at the voice. He located Ronan. He saw the phone. His expression moved from authority to something more urgent. "Whatever you're doing," Bowen said, walking toward the side entrance. "Stop. Right now. You're interfering with a federal 94, bub, Ronan said. One of the agents moved to intercept the path between Bowen and Ronan. Parrish stepped into the agent's path without touching him, which was its own kind of impassable. You don't understand what you're involved in, Bowen said. His voice had shifted, the authority voice giving way to something underneath it, something that was trying to find the lever that would make this stop. The people in those files, the scope of this, you have no idea what happens when this 97, Ronan said. Stop, Bowen said. And then, more quietly, with the specific quietness of a man abandoning the performance of authority and speaking from the place underneath it, please. Ronan looked up from the phone for the first time. He looked at Bowen across the wet parking lot, through the rain and the amber neon and the rows of chrome, and what passed between the two men in that look was not triumph and not contempt. It was something simpler and more final, the look of a man who has finished a task and is setting it down. 100, Ronan said. He pressed send. In the silence that followed, 2 full seconds of it, the specific silence of something irreversible completing itself. The only sounds were the rain on the asphalt and the distant low frequency of bikes, and somewhere inside the diner the sound of Ruby Calloway setting down a coffee pot. Then Ronan held up the phone and looked at it. It's done, he said. Not loudly, just enough. Bowen stood in the rain. Something happened to his face. The collapse of the thing that had been maintaining itself in his expression for 20 years. A collapse that happened so fast and so completely that for a moment he looked much older than he was. The face of a man suddenly standing at the full distance from all his choices. He said nothing. He looked at the ground. He looked at his agents. One of them was already on the phone. Deputy Macon Price made the arrest at 2:47 in the morning. Not the agents, Price. With his badge and his service weapon and his 25 years in Milford Ridge, Kentucky, where he had coached JV basketball and eaten at Ruby's 3 mornings a week and made the specific ongoing error of valuing comfort over honesty for long enough that the error had compounded into something he was going to spend the next several years answering for. He had negotiated that accounting with himself somewhere in the 20 minutes between giving Ronan his phone and watching Bowen's face complete its collapse, and the accounting had produced, in him, a quality of grim clarity that was not peace but was at least honest. He put handcuffs on Darren Voss at 2:47 in the parking lot of Ruby's Diner while the rain finally began to ease. Not stop, just ease, the way Kentucky rain does when it has been making its point for long enough. Voss didn't resist. He stood with his hands behind his back and looked at the ground and said nothing, which was the first honest thing he'd done in 8 years. Bowen was taken by his own agents, the calculus of self-preservation inside federal law enforcement being what it is, and the story being already published by 2:41 a.m. in a form that made the choice between distance and complicity extremely clear. He was driven away in one of the dark SUVs without ceremony. The other SUV stayed. The sheriff arrived at 3:15, not because Price called him, because Claire Vasquez's story had already hit the wire, and the sheriff had a phone that received notifications, and the notification he received at 2:59 a.m. had been enough to get him dressed and in his vehicle in under 10 minutes. He arrived looking like a man trying to determine which side of a line he was on before he got out of his car, and when he got out, he looked at Price, and then at the Iron Saints, and then at Ronan Creed specifically, and then he made a decision that would define the remainder of his career. He walked to Ronan and said, "What do you need from me?" Ronan looked at him for a moment. "A statement," Ronan said, "on the record, supporting the children involved, tonight, not in a week." The sheriff looked at his shoes, looked up. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." Sandra Mercer had stopped performing calm somewhere around 2 in the morning and had simply become calm, which is a different thing. The calm that arrives not because the situation has resolved, but because a person has used up every available unit of controlled fear, and what remains is something underneath the fear, something more fundamental. She sat in booth 7 with a coffee she was actually drinking rather than holding as a prop, and she watched the parking lot through the not repaired, still broken, rain-sealed with a piece of cardboard Ruby had taped over it, window. And she processed the night in the way mothers process things. Not linearly, not efficiently, but in a spiral that kept returning to the same center. Her son. Eli was asleep. He had fallen asleep in the booth around 1:30, his head on his folded arms on the table, the gray hoodie still 2 sizes too large, the pale hair falling across his forehead in the specific arrangement it always fell, the arrangement she had been looking at for 11 years. She had not moved him. She had put her jacket over his shoulders and let him sleep and watched him sleep and done the thing that parents do when their children sleep, assembled the full inventory of everything they should have done differently, and held it without resolution. Ash Mercer sat across from her. He had come in from the parking lot at 2:15, wet through, and sat down without asking, and Sandra had looked at him and not told him to leave, which was its own kind of answer. They had talked for 40 minutes, not about the night, or not only about the night, about Thomas, about the years before Thomas left, about the particular way their family had come apart in increments so gradual that each one had seemed survivable in isolation. About Eli at 8, at 9, at 10, becoming quieter in the way that children become quieter when the adults around them are too full of their own noise to leave space. About the calls Ash hadn't returned. About the door he'd closed. Sandra had not forgiven him. She had been honest about that, direct in the way of a woman who had used up her supply of diplomatic evasion sometime around midnight. "I'm not there yet," she'd said, "but I'm not closed to it." Ash had said, "That's more than I've earned." She'd said, "Yeah, it is." And they had sat with that, which was where the conversation needed to sit. At 4 in the morning, Ruby turned on the diner lights to full bright, the overhead fluorescents that she usually kept at half for the early pre-dawn hours. The ones that showed every scratch in the laminate and every ring left by 1,000 coffee cups, and every groove worn into the stools by the accumulated weight of 31 years of Milford Ridge, coming in to eat and talk and be human at each other. She turned them up because she had been watching the parking lot thin out as the night aged, Saints bikes peeling off in 1s and 2s, and she understood that the people still inside were in the part of a long night that required honest light rather than kind dimness. She put on a fresh pot of coffee. She made eggs, not because anyone had ordered them, but because eggs at 4 in the morning were the correct response to the kind of night that had just occurred, and Ruby Calloway had strong opinions about appropriate responses to situations. She put a plate in front of Ash, in front of Sandra, in front of Price, who had come in after finishing with the sheriff and sat at the counter with the specific posture of a man who has just done the hardest thing and is not certain it was enough, which is the correct thing to be uncertain about. She looked at Eli, still asleep in the booth, and she did not put a plate in front of him. She put a plate on the counter nearby, covered with a second plate to keep it warm for when he woke up. Ronan came in at 4:15. He was dry now. He'd changed into a spare jacket from his bike's saddlebag, and he moved through the diner with the same economy he always moved with, and he sat at the counter, and Ruby poured him coffee without being asked, and he drank it and looked at the room. At Price, who was rebuilding himself from the inside with the slow, unglamorous work of a man who has no one to blame and has decided to start there. At Sandra, who was looking at her sleeping son with an expression that contained everything she couldn't say yet. At Ash, who was looking at the table with the expression of a man who has stopped running and doesn't know what the stillness means but is going to find out. At Eli, sleeping. At the cardboard over the broken window, where rain still tapped intermittently. At the coffee in his cup. Eli woke at 5:12 to the smell of eggs and coffee and the low murmur of adult voices in the specific frequency of adults who have been talking for hours and have arrived, finally, at the part of conversation that doesn't need to be loud. He lifted his head from his arms. His neck ached. There was a crease from his sleeve printed on his cheek. He blinked at the fluorescent light and at the diner around him, at his mother across the table, at his uncle beside her, at Ruby behind the counter, at the man with the badge sitting 2 stools from Ronan, at the scattered remaining saints nursing coffee at the far booths, at Ronan, who looked up from his cup and met Eli's eyes. "It's done?" Eli said. His voice was rough from sleep and hours of held tension. "It's done," Ronan said. Eli processed this. He sat up. He pressed the back of his hand against his left side, the hoodie lining still empty, and then let his hand drop to the table. "Voss?" "Arrested," Ronan said. "Price did it. On the record." Eli looked at Price. Price looked back at him with the expression of a man who has no claim on a child's forgiveness, but is present for the accounting regardless. "And the other kids?" Eli said. "The names? The other counties?" "It's published," Ronan said. "All of it. By the time school starts this morning, it's in every news feed in the state." Eli looked at the table, at the laminate scratch, at his own hands. "Marcus?" he said. "He's okay," Ash said. "He's with a family I trust. He's going to be okay." Eli nodded slowly. He absorbed all of it in the specific way of a person who has been carrying a weight for so long that when it's finally lifted, they can't immediately feel the difference. The muscles still holding the shape of the load, the body still braced for something that isn't there. His mother reached across the table and put her hand over his. He looked at it, at her hand on his hand. He didn't move away. He didn't move toward. He simply let it be there, which was where they were, and where they were was real and was a start. "I should have listened," Sandra said. She had said some version of this in the night, but this was different. This was the morning version, the one that didn't have the urgency of crisis behind it, the one that had to stand on its own in the honest light. "From the beginning, I should have listened." Eli looked at her. "Yeah," he said, not cruelly, not as a wound, just as the truth, which was what the morning required. "I know," she said. "I know you know," he said. Sandra's jaw tightened and then released. Her eyes went bright, and then she made the decision not to let them go further than bright, because she had been crying at her son throughout the night, and she understood in some fundamental place that he didn't need her tears right now. He needed her steady. She was going to practice steady. "Ruby," she said, "can we get more coffee?" "Already poured," Ruby said. Outside, the morning came in the way Kentucky mornings come in Octobers, slowly with a kind of grudging gray that eventually decides to commit to light. The rain had stopped somewhere around 4:30 and left everything washed clean and cold and smelling of wet leaves and asphalt and the particular freshness that follows a night of weather. Ronan stood on the diner step at 5:45 with a second coffee and watched his people. There were 11 of them left in the lot now. The others had peeled off in the hours before dawn, most heading to the motel on Route 9 where the club had taken rooms, a few heading further. The 11 remaining moved around the bikes with the unhurried motions of men at the end of a long thing, checking engines, rolling and lighting cigarettes, speaking to each other in low voices. They had the quality that Ronan had observed in men after difficult operations. Not relaxed exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific state of a body that has been running at maximum capacity for hours and is now permitting itself to de-escalate 1 degree at a time. Parrish stood near the entrance, as he had stood through most of the night. He looked at Ronan. Something passed between them that didn't need words. An acknowledgement, a settling of accounts, the simple mutual recognition of men who had stood in the same place through the same weather and come out the other side. "We heading out this morning?" Parrish asked. "This morning," Ronan said. "Few hours." Parrish nodded. He looked at the diner window, through which Eli was visible at the counter now, eating the eggs Ruby had kept warm, not saying anything, just eating with the focused deliberateness of a very hungry child who has decided that eating is the appropriate activity for this moment. "Kid's gonna be okay," Parrish said. "Yeah," Ronan said. "The uncle's staying." "Ash stays," Ronan said. "He's got things to rebuild here." He looked at his coffee. "Should have been here 3 years ago, but here's where he is." "Better late," Parrish said. "Sometimes," Ronan said. At 6:30, Eli came outside. He stood on the diner step in the cold morning air in his gray hoodie and looked at the parking lot, at the bikes, at the men moving around them. His hands were in his pockets. His breath made small clouds in the October air. He looked like what he was, an 11-year-old boy at the end of the longest night of his life, standing in the clear cold aftermath of it. Ronan was at his bike. He had the saddlebag open and was organizing things with the methodical patience of a man who had packed and unpacked in field conditions enough times that the ritual of it was calming. Eli walked over. He stood beside the bike for a moment. He looked at it. The scuffed chrome, the road miles worn into the leather seat, the Iron Saints patch on the saddlebag flap. faded enough that the thread had gone soft. "Where do you go now?" Eli asked. "East," Ronan said. "Eventually." "Do you always just—" Eli paused. "Do you always just move around?" "Mostly," Ronan said. "Doesn't that get—" He searched for the word. "Lonely?" Ronan looked at him. He considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "Sometimes," he said. "Yeah." Eli nodded. He looked at the bike. "I didn't think anyone was going to help," he said. "I'd stopped—" He stopped. "I'd kind of stopped thinking it was going to happen. Someone helping." "I know," Ronan said. "Why did you?" Eli said. "Listen. You didn't know me. You didn't have to." Ronan closed the saddlebag. He straightened up. He looked at this boy. Pale eyes in the morning light, hoodie 2 sizes too large, breath clouding in the October air. The particular question in his face of someone who genuinely wants to understand the mechanics of kindness, because the mechanics have been mostly hidden from them. "Because you came and sat down," Ronan said. "You sat down across from a stranger who frightened most of this town, and you told the truth. That takes something." He paused. "And because someone should have listened to you months ago, and nobody did. And that—" He said this next part carefully, because it was true, and the truth of it was located somewhere that had a name he didn't use often. "That's something I recognize. Being the one people don't listen to." Eli looked at him for a long moment. "You were that kid too," Eli said. Ronan said nothing. He looked at the sky, which was doing what skies do after they've been thoroughly committed to rain, pale and washed and cautiously luminous. "Was it ever okay?" Eli said. "After?" Ronan looked back at him. "Different," he said. "It was different after. Not the same as okay, but different has its own thing going for it." He paused. "You've got your uncle now. Your mom's—" He searched for the precise word. "She's turning toward you. That matters. And Marcus is going to need someone who knows what it's like to be the first one who said something out loud." He held Eli's eyes. "You were the first one. That has a weight, but it also has a meaning." Eli absorbed this. "You saw me," he said, "when nobody else did." Ronan held the boy's gaze, those pale blue Mercer eyes in the October morning, the eyes that would carry what they'd carried and add to it the memory of this particular night and build something out of the combination, the way people build things out of the materials available to them. "That's what people are supposed to do," Ronan said. Eli nodded slowly. He put his hands back in his pockets. He looked at the bike one more time. "I'm going to be okay," he said. Not as a question, as a statement being field tested for the first time. "Yeah," Ronan said. "You are." The Iron Saints left Milford Ridge at 7:43 in the morning, under an October sky that had finally committed to light. Eli stood outside Ruby's diner beside his mother as the bikes rolled out, one by one, down Callaway Street toward Route 9 and the long eastward highway beyond. The sound they made going out was the same sound they'd made coming in, that sustained declaration, that collective voice, but with a different quality to it now, the way a chord can be the same notes and a different feeling depending on what came before it. Along Main Street, people watched, not from behind curtains, from doorways, from sidewalks, from the parking lots of the hardware store and the pharmacy and the Dairy Queen that had been closed since 9 the previous night and wouldn't open for 2 more hours. They watched the way a town watches something it doesn't yet have the language for, but is in the process of developing it, quietly, with the morning coffee in their hands and the headline already on their phones and the realization settling in, slow and cold and thorough as October rain, that the things they'd been afraid of and the things they should have been afraid of had been wearing different faces all along. Ronan stopped at the curb in front of Ruby's. He looked at Eli. He looked at Sandra, who was standing with her hand on her son's shoulder and the expression of a woman in the first morning of a different life, not knowing what it looked like yet, but standing in it regardless. He looked at Ash beside them, who looked back at him with the expression of a man who has found the place he was supposed to come back to and is still deciding whether he deserves to be there, which was the right question to be sitting with. Nobody said much. Men like Ronan Creed had learned long ago that the moments which carried the most weight were the ones that collapsed under the pressure of too many words, that some things were only fully themselves in the silence around them. He nodded once at Eli. Eli nodded back. Then the engine rose, and Ronan Creed pulled out onto Calloway Street, and the last of the Iron Saints followed, and the sound of them moved down through the town and out toward the highway, becoming larger for a moment as it hit the open road, and then smaller, and then present only as a felt vibration in the sternum, and then not even that. Only the ordinary sounds of a Kentucky morning, birds and wind and someone's screen door, and the distant grate of a garbage truck 2 streets over. Eli watched until the sound was gone. He stood in the quiet with his mother's hand on his shoulder and his uncle beside him in the cold light, and the diner behind him smelling of coffee and eggs, and 31 years of human persistence. And he stood there for a long time in the way a person stands somewhere when they are trying to memorize it. Not the specific details which fade, but the quality of the moment, the temperature of it, the weight of the air, the particular feeling of a world that had been cold for a long time finally, provisionally, incompletely, with no guarantees and every reason for them anyway, turning a degree or two toward something that felt, in its cautious and hard-won and imperfect way, like warmth. He didn't forgive everything that morning. Some of what had happened to him would take years to name and more years still to carry without being carried by it. Marcus Webb would testify in front of a grand jury 6 weeks later, quiet and precise and devastating. And Eli would sit with Ash in a hallway outside and not say anything and not need to. Sandra Mercer would spend every Tuesday night for 4 months in a family counselor's office in Bowling Green, doing the long, unglamorous work of a person rebuilding their own architecture from the load-bearing elements out. Ash would stay. Thomas Mercer would call, not soon, but eventually, and the call would be difficult and true, and a beginning. Deputy Macon Price would resign his commission in December. He would spend the following year cooperating with state investigators, and the year after that working at a youth crisis center in Lexington, which was not redemption but was work, which was what redemption is made of. Garrett Webb would be found 3 days after the publication of Claire Vasquez's story at a motel in Elizabethtown, and would cooperate with investigators with the thoroughness of a man who had sent a partial file manifest from a moving car and had been calculating his options ever since. His testimony would add 3 names to the list of people who had known and chosen the comfortable silence. His son Marcus would not visit him in the proceedings that followed. That was Marcus's to decide, and Marcus had decided. And Ash Mercer, who understood the specific weight of that decision better than most, did not push. Darren Voss would go to trial the following spring. The trial would last 11 days, and the verdict would come back in 3 hours, which in the mathematics of justice was both too fast and not fast enough, which is the only speed justice knows how to move at. Claire Vasquez's story would run for 7 weeks across 3 publications. It would be nominated for the prize it deserved and would win it. In her acknowledgments, she would thank, without naming, the people in a parking lot in Kentucky who had stood in the rain and not moved. She would know who they were. They would know who they were. That was enough. And in the October morning in Milford Ridge, Kentucky, after the last engine note had dissolved into the ordinary sounds of a town that was in the early, difficult, necessary process of becoming honest with itself, Eli Mercer put his hands in his pockets and turned toward the diner door and went back inside, where Ruby was already pouring another cup of something hot, and the light was full and true and unsparing and sufficient, and the world, for all its cold and carelessness and long record of choosing the wrong thing, had managed, this once, to do what it was supposed to do. It had shown up, not clean, not easy, not without cost, but there. Pocham, the Saints of Milford Ridge, this has been their story. Thank you for staying until the end.